The Baggies Podcast, giving you the latest news, views and opinions on all things Albion. Now available on YouTube, Apple Podcasts and Spotify.
Hello Albion fans and welcome back to another episode of the Baggies Podcast. We're joined by a very special guest this week. I'm not alone. I'm joined by an international guest, I may say, an international Albion fan. I'm joined by Baden from WBA Canada. Baden, how are you doing, mate? Welcome to the show.
Oh, I'm doing great. How are you doing today?
I'm doing really well. Honestly, it's fantastic to have you. Fantastic to get some international opinion on Albion. Obviously, we've been speaking to some content creators, but you are the first that we've had, definitely from Canada. Baden, you've obviously been doing some fantastic work with your WBA Canada stuff. How did you sort of get into supporting West Bromwich Albion, and how did that start off for you?
So it's really simple. My mom's from West Bromwich, and it was sort of in a joking way, but not really. She was like, you got to cheer for West Brom, else you're not living in my house. So it's just that simple.
So you'd say you were pretty forced into this sort of lifestyle in this club, I'd say.
Yeah, it was definitely a force, but I love it. I mean, it really feels like you're a part of something, and it's unique for me because, as you can probably imagine, there's not a lot of West Brom fans over here. So,
have you met any West Brom fans in Canada at all, or are you apart from your mum, of course, but or are you the only one?
Well, funny enough, I went to a soccer game for the Toronto FC, which is the local MLS club. And anyways, we're walking through the concourse at the game. I think it was halftime. And I walked past a guy wearing a bright yellow and green shirt.
Yeah.
So my immediate thought is, hold on, that's the 70s West Brom away kit. But then you're sort of second guessing yourself, thinking, wait a minute, it could be a Norwich shirt, it could be, you know what I mean? So I look back, and the guy was wearing the WBA, that kit, like the classic Cyril Regis sort of kit, right? Yeah. And so I haven't really we didn't end up interacting at all, but I have seen a few people just in odd places, but it's not something that I've really had a lot of interaction with other people because, you just don't see it very often.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think you should have approached him. I think you should have gone, oi mate, well, are you an Albion fan or something like that?
Yeah, no, I probably should have at the time. It was match day. I was buzzing, how it is sometimes.
Definitely. I mean, I've just, walking out of the game, I think I've just walked past about 50 people who are probably ex-Albion players, and I've just sort of walked past them because, it's like being on a match day. And you've obviously been doing really well with your WBA Canada pages, obviously interacting with a lot of fans over here and in North America as well. When did you start doing that, and when did that start coming about for you?
Well, it kind of came up as something. I was obviously bored. We were in quarantine. And we were just promoted, and that promotion, it's really for the first time for me, because I'm 18 years old. I don't really have a lot of memories of past promotions, and it's always been difficult to watch West Brom when we're in the championship. This is the first time I really got to watch them get promoted. So it really felt this was the very first time I got to see them really achieve a winning season like that. So it really made me feel like I wanted to do something. And the goal was just to try and spread the fact that I'm a West Brom fan and interact with people. I never thought I would be doing stuff like YouTube and talking to people like the American Throstle from Seattle, but it kind of just came about that way. And it was just sort of a thing I wanted to do to kill some time. And then it sort of became more of just more than just a thing to kill time.
Yeah, and you've been quite big talking about killing time. You've been quite busy over the past couple of weeks. You managed to talk to a man who a lot of West Brom fans will know quite well, and who has a couple of affiliations with your nationality and your supporting club. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that and what you've been up to?
Yeah, so it was I came up there was a real interest for me to getting into the YouTube thing, but it's difficult because I found I tried the thing where you just talk to the camera, and I couldn't do it by myself.
Yeah.
Like I couldn't just be like, right, hey everyone, this is what's going on. So I decided I want to get a couple people to interview, and I thought, of course, the first thought is players and former players, but it's not really, especially in Canada, it's not really something you can just reach out and say, I want to talk to you. You know what I mean? So I sent a lot of DMs, like a crazy amount. And the first thing I really did was look into people who are Canadian who have affiliation with West Brom.
Yeah.
And mostly that's former players. So I think there was about 3 or 4 of them. One of which was Paul Pescasolido. And he's from about an hour away from where I live right now. So it's like right close to home for me that if I could talk to him, it would be great. So I found him on Twitter and messaged him, not really expecting much. And then a couple of days later, I got a response. It's great because he is from obviously the area I'm from. And he played for the Toronto Blizzard, which is a former team that is probably the team I'd be supporting if they were still a team. And it's obviously he played for West Brom, so it was just that simple, and it was just an easy conversation to have because he's also played for Canada, and I found a lot of similarities to his sort of story to mine because he loves soccer, but it's not necessarily like as big over here. So it was really simple.
Oh, well, well, listeners, if you do fancy having a watch of Baden's interview with Pescasolido, you can check the link out in the description and obviously go and have a little watch of that because I personally found it very interesting. Honestly, it was really great to listen to that. But Baden, if we move on to talking about Albion now and what the club is at the moment, obviously pre-season, I think before the season started, I think we were looking relatively odds on for relegation even before things started. What were your thoughts on sort of how you thought this season might go after the promotion?
Well, first of all, there was a couple big gambles because we spent our money on Diangana and Robinson, and we brought back Kravinovic. And you never quite know what you're going to get from your stars in the championship. We were gambling that they would really make that jump. Obviously, there was also Carlin Grant, who had a great season last year with Huddersfield. But I wasn't quite sure what to expect because I didn't quite think that they were going to make that jump and that it was going to be as good as it was last year. But I also thought if they can all it is circumstances. If they could get it all together, I think they have enough to survive. But the frustrating thing is it was apparent early on in the season that what we had wasn't enough to be in the Premier League. Yeah.
And were you pleased to see these signings come back? Because I felt at the time I was pretty over the moon with people like Diangana and even Carlin Grant, who obviously had really good seasons themselves in the Championship last season. Were you pleased at the time? Obviously, we're not so pleased now that we spent our money on those players, perhaps. But were you pleased when we first signed them?
Yeah, I definitely was. I thought Diangana was going to make a big step this year. I even bought a Diangana jersey, which I totally regret now. But it was they're young guys, and I think for a club like us, we're not going to have the money ever to sign the stars of the Premier League. So the only way you can really build a team is through your youth. So I was excited. I was particularly excited with Diangana because I thought he was our marquee signing of the summer, and I thought he was going to take that big jump, and I didn't think West Ham was going to let him go, but
I think a lot of people were surprised. I mean, it was probably a bit of fault at their end, really, for letting him go, because I don't think that the manager or any of the players were particularly keen on letting a player like that go, because he's obviously got lots of potential and he might grow up to be a really, really great player. But do you think perhaps we did enough signings wise, or do you think that we should have brought in perhaps more players like we maybe have in January this year, or do you think that might have been enough for then, or?
We definitely needed more. The only player who I think really stepped into the role right off the bat was Sam Johnston, because I think even Matthias Pereira, we've been singing the praise of him for the last couple of weeks because he's been playing phenomenal, but I generally think he's been quite poor this year, and I've taken a little bit of backlash for that one, but I think we could have done with obviously we could have started the season with some of these like or Maitland-Niles, and I think we've really seen through January what the difference really was, because I don't think Romain Sawyers is good enough to be the Premier League centre mid that we hoped he would be, and I think Jake Livermore, to put it lightly, has the mobility of a 50-year-old man, so
it's fair.
So
definitely probably fair, to be honest. I mean, I've got Livermore on the back of this shirt simply due to him being so good in the Championship last year. But obviously, at the start of the season, we started not great throughout those first couple of games. Obviously, we did play quite well against Chelsea. However, even though it ended up with a 3-3 draw, I think a lot of people would have taken a point against Chelsea in the first place. But obviously, that was quite a difficult time. Were those games that you would have thought that maybe there's a glimmer of hope for us, or was it sort of, oh, we're back to reality after that fantastic promotion?
I've always found with the club, we always seem to perform better against teams that are big, like Chelsea. And I found that this year, and you can see it in the results. Like we drew against Chelsea, we beat Chelsea, we drew with United, we drew with City, we drew with Liverpool. And those games, obviously, you can't help but feel like there's a turning point. I really thought there was going to be a turning point when we tied with City at the Etihad, but then obviously Bilic got sacked and Sam Allardyce came in, and it sort of didn't work out right away because he didn't have the players he needed. But I feel like the opportunity to stay in the Premier League, you got to take your chances against the teams around you, not the teams, because I sort of think of it as most of the teams who you're going to be around are going to lose to Manchester City, Manchester. So those games, obviously those points are nice to have, but the points you really need to get are the points around you, and the points against teams who are sort of in the middle. Like I sort of think Aston Villa is at a point where they're sort of not quite an unbeatable team, but they're not quite like down in where West Brom is. So, and that's respect to them, because I can't stand them, but you know, they've set up well.
Yeah, I think it's that thing where people know we sort of know how to play against those bigger teams, because there's only really one way to play, and you play quite defensively, and then you try and break forward when you can. But it's when we play these teams that we should be beating, when we have to come out and play a bit nicer football, when we have to actually play a bit of football to try and unlock these defenses. I think that's when we sort of start to struggle. If we go to the Slaven Bilic sacking, obviously it was on the day after quite a really good draw against Man City. I know that's quite a silly phrase to say it was a really good draw, but when you consider the quality of their players and what sort of money they have available to them, it was a really good result. Did you sort of agree with Slaven Bilic's sacking at the time? I know a lot of people's opinions will have changed, but what did you think about the Slaven Bilic sacking when it happened?
I wasn't happy about it because you just see his passion. I loved the passion of Slaven Bilic, the fact he would stand the whole game and be supporting his team. obviously he did so well with us last year, considering the fact that I still don't think we had a proper striker last year, and we managed to get promoted. And then even he just is the way he held himself. I mean, I like the fact he's a little bit younger as well. Like you see all these older guys, Sam Allardyce is included, the Roy Hodgson type. I like that he was just a little bit younger. And he could, and the players he brought in, like he brought in Pereira, and there was Diangana, and I always felt like he had such good connections with other clubs, and especially his Croatian connections. And he brought in players like Krovinovic, right? So that was the things that was frustrating for me. And then you see Allardyce coming in, and you sort of think, well, here we go again with the good old-fashioned English manager who's just going to try and play defense. And I thought it was going to be Pulis 2.0, to be fair.
And obviously Bilic was a manager that quite a lot of people were fans of. I was same as you, really. I was pretty annoyed at the time. I thought it was more the timing of things, because if you were going to sack him, the time to do that was maybe after you'd lost 5-0 to 5-1 or whatever it was to Crystal Palace or something like that. Not after you just drawn with Man City, which is, for most managers, that's a real achievement. And I think a lot of people were pretty saddened by it. Obviously, Allardyce's appointment came really quickly after that. Obviously, it's something that they've been organising behind the scenes. You mentioned him playing a more defensive style. Did you think did you think much of that managerial signing, or was it just sort of same old as we had with Pulis and Pardew?
Well, first of all, I think the issue was, again, COVID, because I think realistically, I'd imagine they had made the decision to fire Bilic after that 5-1 loss, but couldn't bring in Big Sam without all the protocols until after the City game. So I'd imagine they probably left it the way it was, just to get through those games, and then they would move forward. Like I said, I wasn't impressed, but Sam Allardyce has the reputation of keeping teams in the Premier League. So I thought, if he can keep us in the league, and we can stay in the league, and then next year we look and try and get a better manager, I'm 100% for that.
Yeah, I think, I definitely agree with you. I think it was sort of like, if it gets us out of that trouble, then maybe it's just about worth it for a little bit, and then we can go back to somebody like Bilic the next season afterwards. But it's sort of a bit difficult, because a lot of clubs struggle with financially keeping themselves in the Premier League. Obviously, it's a huge goal to stay in the Premier League because of the money and stuff. But Norwich today, they've gone up after keeping the same manager. Would you maybe taken going down with Bilic and then having that rebuild with similar players and coming back up afterwards?
I would have, but I don't think it was going to happen, because I think Bilic himself was at a breaking point where I don't think he was going to sign another contract extension. So I think he would probably have walked at the end of the year. I obviously would have loved to have had him for another year, because I thought he was a good coach. And like I said, the previous things, his passion and all of that. But I think it was going to happen that he was going to leave. And I think especially when you hear stories like after Hagazi was gone, he threatened to leave, right? It's just it was doomed from it wasn't ever gonna come to a point where he was gonna be the coach next year, I think.
I think there were far too many clashes behind the scenes. Obviously, I wouldn't say that's more towards Bilic. I think it's more towards the board. I mean, the Hegazi sale, as you mentioned there, was probably the worst one for me. Just, if he didn't want him to go, then he shouldn't have left behind his back. I think that was a pretty bad thing. Obviously, Allardyce came in and he didn't start very well. I think that was what surprised a lot of people. I think even if it meant we drew 0-0 for the next 5 games, I think it would at least show a defensive perhaps improvement. But it didn't happen that way. We obviously started off with some pretty nasty batterings. Obviously, we did draw with Liverpool in there, but it didn't start well. Why do you think Big Sam didn't quite get off to the start that we all thought that maybe he would?
It came down to the players. And it's an issue for whatever coach we had, because we didn't put enough money in the summer, and we didn't bring in players who were good enough to play in the Premier League. And I think they went through a system change, which is obviously when you're already not good enough to be there.
Yeah.
You're not gonna fare much differently, especially when you have to start with a new system. And I also think, to be fair, I think they were quite close to being like some of these players are quite close, and I think Pereira is going to be a Premier League player next year.
Yeah.
Same with Johnston, but I just don't think that the players were good enough. And it's sort of a point of, you could bring in any coach, like you could bring in Sir Alex Ferguson, and I still don't think they would be able to stay up with the way they were playing, like in their form. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think it was a massive task for him when he came in. To be fair, I know he's done this before, and he's come into clubs that are really in trouble, and he saved them. But I don't think he's ever come into a club that were this underprepared for Premier League football, or this under ability for Premier League. But I think it was a real task for him. Obviously, January came around, and he did make the signings that have obviously gone on to leading to better form. Your Kushlu, we've got Diagne and of course Ainsley Maitland-Niles, who you mentioned earlier, and obviously Snodgrass as well, who hasn't played a massive part, but he's still a signing. Do you think those were really good additions, or do you think that they were, at the time, that they were sort of short-term moves to try and keep us in the league? Or would you have preferred maybe to see a younger manager come in instead and try and build some positive atmosphere ahead of next season?
I liked the signings because I think the midfielders were exactly what we needed. Yeah. It's unfortunate that they were loans, because I always feel like the thing that dug us this hole is the fact that we had so many loan players last year who got us to the Premier League, and now we're doing virtually the same thing. But I mean, it's all a matter of, would you rather go down swinging and try and stay in the Premier League, and maybe next year you can adapt again, or if you make that appointment of a youth manager, then I think you're pretty much saying, right, we're not planning for this year, we're talking about next year now. And I don't think that's a message you want to send. Personally, I think I liked it. I don't know. It's just, and I like the big, strong striker. It's interesting because Allardyce seems to know exactly what players he needs to make his teams good. Yeah. And you saw it, and we see it now after the fantastic results back to back we had. How much of a difference him having his players makes.
Yeah, I think so. I think that was the thing. I think if you're going to sack Billet, I think you should have at least left it till maybe January or something, because if you could keep him with his players for so long, and then if you bring somebody like Allardyce in, the first thing he can do when he gets through the door is bring in the ones he wants, rather than having that period where we got beat 5 and 4-0 by Leeds and Arsenal, and then Allardyce can bring in his players. I think it was a bit silly how we timed things, really. But obviously, Kushlu and Diagne and Ainsley Maitland-Niles have all been really good additions, and they've helped us to a bit better form, and that's led to quite a few people being thinking about us staying in the division, basically. Obviously, Newcastle winning today has not helped our chances whatsoever. Thanks to Craig Dawson getting himself sent off, has not really helped us in that game. Do you think the impossible might just be possible, or do you think it's getting slimmer and slimmer as we keep going by?
I don't think it's going to happen. Now, it hurts me to say that, but it's too late. It's going to take a miracle, and we needed them. If West Ham had beaten Newcastle today, I would think maybe, just maybe, but I'm glad to see we're fighting for it, but I think it's a matter of too little, too late.
And these two games that I've got, I personally agree. I think, and although it's nice to dream, and although it's nice to be positive, and at least we can try and get together a better end to the season, moving into next season. But I think these two games have been really good for us. Obviously, it's been completely different to what we've seen from this team that Big Sam came in and played with for his first few games and his first period at the club. And obviously, we've just been converting chances like it wasn't even a problem in the first place. What do you think has gone so well for our team over the past couple of games?
It all comes down to shape and how we're pressing. Because the key is, and I've been saying this since Christmas.
Yeah.
Well, actually, since Dieng came in.
Mm-hmm.
If you play Dieng with Robinson, you got a little bit more attacking presence. And I think maybe Robinson's not that striker who finishes every chance, although he has been the last couple weeks. But he's quick, and quick forwards make defensive players make mistakes. And if you look at the pressing that we had against Southampton, we just weren't letting them have anything. Yeah. We had the phantom offside goal.
Yeah.
And then, but even I was looking, I'm in, a couple of the group chats with the West Brom fans and all that.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody's saying, well, that's crap. But I was saying, well, it's coming. The way we're playing, we're going to score.
Yeah.
That's what I said. And sure enough, about 15 minutes later, Pereira makes that smart decision to put Forster in a very difficult position, because you got to foul him or you give him an empty net, right? So
yeah.
It was just, they're playing so intelligently, and this is what I was hoping for at the beginning of the season, because this was the teams I'm sort of talking about that are that middle ground type of team. Like Southampton is one of them, where they're probably a better team than us, but if we play hard and we try and press hard and work harder than they do, we can beat them.
Yeah, I think it's definitely about that pressing, because far too often under Big Sam, we've actually found ourselves backing off teams like, Sheffield United in that second half of that game that we lost under Allardyce was such a big example of that, where we just sort of let them come at us, and in the end they scored twice. Whereas with Southampton, we weren't sitting back in that game. We were going all at them, and it was really great to see. Do you think that for next season, would you perhaps, if obviously assuming that we go down to the Championship, I think is what we're saying here, but do you think Big Sam is the man that you would want to keep on, or is it time for somebody else to come in and do a job?
I would like him to stay. I don't think he will, because I think he'll say, I'd rather just be available for the next Premier League team who wants to try and stay in the Premier League. But personally, I see the signings he's made, and I think he can make a couple more signings. We all painted him with the reputation of being a defensive coach, but I actually don't think he's been that defensive for us. Obviously, that Sheffield game, but after he brought in all of his players, the four of them, we have been a way better team, and we haven't been a team who sits behind the ball as often. Now, in the Premier League, obviously, you're going to do that against teams like the big clubs like City and all of them. But I think keep him. I think that's also the only chance we have of keeping any of these loan players who he's brought in. And I think if we can keep any of those guys, it might be right back up to the Premier League.
Yeah, I think obviously he's managed to get those in off his own back, so he's managed to talk with them and say, you're going to come and play for me. I think next season, if he's not there, I don't think you've got much of a chance of keeping the players that he's tried so hard to persuade to come here. I think it would be quite difficult as a different manager. In terms of, obviously, we'll talk about who might stay in a little bit, but who would you? There's a lot of deadwood in our squad. I know it's not a nice thing to say they are footballers and not actual wood or anything. But do you think who would you get rid of out of this squad? I know there's a lot of contract expires, but who would you say needs to maybe pack their bags and move on from Albion?
Well, the first one, and he's already going, so it's good for me. Kieran Gibbs is on his way out. Branislav Ivanovic, I don't know why we signed him.
Yeah.
It just doesn't make sense to me. But there's a couple players, I think, even though he's been playing well, I think I'm ready to move on from Matt Phillips. Because especially, it's sort of a market of, he's been playing well the last couple weeks. Can you get a decent haul of money from a championship club for him? And then move on. But maybe, like, obviously we got a couple strikers still, but that are like on loan. Like Austin's still technically our player. I'm fine with him staying at QPR for the rest of his career. Kenneth Sahor, another stupid signing. I don't think I ever want to see him in a West Brom shirt again. But generally, I think I don't quite get it. I see a couple people saying, should we get rid of Diangana? Should we get rid of Grant? Should we get rid of players like that? And those are the type of players who are going to thrive next year in the championship if we're back there. So I think it's important that we keep those guys, and it's also important for their marketable, like how you market them if you're going to sell them going forward, because right now they're at the lowest of the low cost wise. Like if we were to sell Diangana this summer, we wouldn't make back half what we paid for him. But if he has another good year next year in the championship, he could possibly fetch us a whole bunch of money if we're in the Premier League and he succeeds on the second go round.
Yeah, I think a lot of values are quite low at the moment for our team, but there's quite a few values that will probably actually be going on the up. There's players like Pereira, there's players like Johnston who you don't want to see go at all because they've arguably been a standout. Obviously, Pereira has had his patches of really good stuff. Johnston's been really consistent. Even somebody like Bartley has really stepped up to the plate. Who do you think is going to leave that maybe you wouldn't want to see leaving the club in the summer?
I think both Pereira and Johnston are going to end up going. I think definitely Johnston will go. I don't think there's a question about that one, because the market for him isn't as much right now. I heard 7 or 8 million for him, which I think is crazy. I think he's worth a lot more than that, but because of COVID stuff and like that, he'll go. And certainly there's a team in the Premier League that would want Sam Johnston to be their starting keeper. Pereira as well, he's, like you said, he's been on form for the last little bit. And it's even the thing I've always thought with him, if you put him in a good Premier League team, like an Everton or someone like that, he could really shine. Yeah, definitely. So I think he'll probably end up going. I think there's less a chance of him going than Johnston, but I think they probably both will end up on their way out. We'll keep Barton Bauer for another year, because I don't think he's going to get that much of a desire from other clubs. Yeah, I think with Pereira, I think you can, because he's young still relatively, you can price people out of moves for him. But Johnston, he's got a year left on his deal after this summer, and that's going to be quite difficult to keep him down to another contract or keep an extension going. I think it's going to be quite difficult. But obviously, we've been watching Premier League football for a while, and we've obviously been watching Championship football last season. And if we were to go down, are there any players that you might like to see us bring in that might be doable transfers? Obviously, you've got the loan players. Feel free to pick them. But obviously, are there any other players that you might want to see bring in? Yeah, obviously, I would like to see every single one of those loan players back. First of all, I don't think we might get. I think there's the 3 midfielders, Gallagher, Maitland-Niles, and and I think I'd like to get at least one of those 3, but I don't really see it happening. But generally, we're going to go into it next year. I think part of it needs to be, we need to stop making loans and start buying players. I'd like to, I don't have particular names where I'm like, yeah, I'd like to sign that guy. But positions, I think I'm ready to move on from Darnell for long.
Yeah.
He's had his moments where, like, he made that cross to get to Robinson on the Chelsea goal, and he's had a couple moments. Obviously, he scored against Newcastle, but I generally just don't think he's good enough to be transitioning into the Premier League. I think that's a right back is something we could use, a new one, and I would have said left back as well, but I think Townsend's really transitioned well.
Yeah.
And I think he can continue on, and he's only going to continue to get better, hopefully. But we're definitely, if we don't sign any of those three midfielders, we're going to need midfielders. And I think a Dieng-esque striker would be good for our club, because I like playing the way we're doing it right now, where we have the two strikers and one's the big hold-up guy and one's sort of a quick, clever sort of striker. And I think if it's a big guy and either Grant or Robinson next year, I think that could be a tandem that could score lots of goals in the championship.
Yeah, I think as well. Alongside from that, I think I'm gonna agree. Definitely midfield, I think, is definitely a big. Especially if we don't sign any of these loan players back, which I think is a bit unlikely. I think maybe I think Yukushlu at the start of his loan spell, just before he started really ripping the ground up for Albion, I think he might have said yes, we could get him, but I think he's going to have so much interest because obviously people have been watching him prove his quality, and he's going to be sought after by quite a few teams. And then Gallagher, maybe for I've seen 9 million being bandied about. It's not that much, but maybe if we're in the Championship, it might be a bit undoable. So, Baden, if you look at the squad as it is, and maybe with a couple of more additions, do you think we could bounce back if we were to go down?
Yeah, I definitely do. I think we'll be right back. Yeah, I'm not sure if it will be the next year, because I always think it's very difficult to go straight one year down and 1 year back up. But I think next year, some of the players who perhaps didn't have the year they wanted to have this year, like Ghana and Grant, are going to have something to prove.
Yeah.
And it's hard to predict, because when you have something to prove, there's two reactions. You're either going to fall apart under the pressure, or you're going to walk into the season with a chip on your shoulder and say, that's not happening again this year. I want to go back up and I want to prove myself. So I'm hoping that's the reaction that we get. And if it is, then surely we're going to bounce right back, and hopefully a year or two, we could be right back where we are today.
Yeah, I think
not in a relegation zone.
Yeah, I think that's just something that we can hope for. If we can come back up, then hopefully we can stay up. But we've got a game on Thursday night, which will be a couple of days after this podcast is going to be released, against Leicester City. That's going to be quite a difficult fixture. Obviously, they're in a little bit of bad form at the moment with a lot of injuries, Leicester, and we're obviously in good form for once. Baden, how do you see this game going on Thursday?
I think it's a draw for me. 1-1 is my prediction. And I think I'd love to see us win. And I think we're going to be, if we play like Southampton, because I think, like you said, they're in a bit of a vulnerable position at the moment. But
yeah,
I think 1-1, they're still obviously a better club. They're the model that the little club needs to follow if they want to start to build, because of how well they've spent their money, and obviously not lucky, but they won the Premier League, and that's not going to happen for a team of their quality very often. So 1-1, that's my decision.
I'm going to go for a 1-0 win for Albion. I know that might be a bit too optimistic, because even with their injuries, I think Leicester have still got a better side and a better quality team. But I'm going to go for a 1-0 win for Albion. But Baden, it's been fantastic to have you on the podcast. Obviously, it's been great hearing your thoughts on the season so far. Obviously, you can go and check out Baden's social media channels and obviously his interview with Pesca Salido via the links in the description. That'll all be available for you. But Baden, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It's really been great having you.
Of course, thanks for having me.
A massive thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Baggies Podcast, and a big thank you to Baden from WBA Canada for joining me for this one. It's been a pleasure having you here. Make sure you're following us on all platforms and giving us a nice review on Apple Podcasts if you've enjoyed the episode. Make sure to follow us and make sure to give us a review. As I said, it really does help. Make sure you subscribe to us on YouTube just to make sure you never miss a podcast. Wherever you're listening from, just make sure you're following, because, you know, if we decide to randomly release a podcast, make sure that you're available and you know when it's out. And if you follow us on Twitter at the Baggies Pod, that's going to let you know on all the latest podcasts. You'll be able to see guest announcements and the lot. But a massive thank you again for listening to this week's episode, and I'll see you very, very, very soon in the next one. Thank you very much for listening. I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.